Very brief introduction. I start with the ladies, if I may. Very happy, Monique, that you were able to join us today. I hope. Okay. Monique, as you all know, is certainly not needing any introduction. She is the Director General of BEUC, European consumer body, and a well-known figure at the European and I dare say international level. Petra doesn't need an introduction really, and you have been just introduced, chairwoman of EIOPA. Happy to have you here. And Adrien Couret, very happy to have you here, CEO of Aéma, the fourth biggest French insurance group. And we are also joined, I hope, by David Knibbe. David was yesterday in a difficult situation because his flight was cancelled. We had not foreseen any tools to bring people in online because, of course, we were hoping to do a fully in-person meeting. So I hope the technical setup will work and that you will see David in a minute. He will join us from the distance. Just checking with the teams whether this works. Working on it? Okay, then we get started and I hope he can join the debate later. So this panel is about how do we serve tomorrow's consumers. And here he is, David. Great to see you. I hope you can hear us.
No.
Yes. Can you hear us? I give him 1 minute and we get started. Adrien, I thought I'd start with you. We are now a little bit at the crossroads, you know, especially when we look at discussions at European level. There was a bit build-up ahead of the Commission presenting its retail investment strategy. It was now presented 2-3 weeks ago. And the question really is, I think that is at the core of what is going to happen, how do we serve our customers best? So from your perspective, what has worked so far, and where do you see from an industry perspective the challenges? Maybe over to you.
Hi everyone, and thank you for this panel. This is a very huge question that you're asking, and well, from the industry perspective, we all have to admit that people in France, from an insurance perspective, are quite well served. When you see UX surveys regarding all the sectors, insurance in France is mostly the first or the second sector with the best user experience. And as far as I can say, from Aéma Groupe, which is a mutual insurance group, we have a very strong focus on the service to our members, and we have roughly a positive feedback. However, each year we ask our policyholders what could be better in the industry and our service. And truth is, we are very challenged by them, and mostly on 3 topics.
Thank you.
I think it could be a good stone to throw on the debate. The first is a very day-to-day concern, is the quality of service, but with a very ambiguous mix between the quickness of the answer and the need of advice. And it might seem contrary, because on one side you need to invest in digital, and the other you need to invest in human professionalism, formation, training. So quality of service is the first big thing, especially with the variety of needs that we need to serve. Second thing is price. In France, there is a very competitive market as regards insurance. It's true for home, car, health insurance. And we have consumers who know that a good insurance is not always the cheapest, because cheap insurance, and we have massive example on the French market, may seem low coverage and low service. So the thing is, how can we explain to the consumers what's behind the price? What is the service? What's the redistribution? It's a notion that we begin to use on the French markets, especially on the mutualist side, and there's still a lot to be done on that. The question of transparency on this point is very important. And the third challenge that we have, which is more systemic, is the question of the new protection gaps coming on the market regarding climate change. We had in 2022 in France massive droughts, which affected not only the accounts of the insurers, but also people's mind regarding their home, and all the protection gaps coming from health and aging society. On these matters, we have a role to play, but hand in hand with the public sector. For instance, in France, the strengthening of the natural catastrophe regime, the regime CatNat, which is a solidarity regime very important at the domestic level, and maybe could be important at a more European level. So, to my view, of course, a good industry, but many challenges coming directly from the policyholders.
Okay, thank you very much, Adrien. Monique, over to you. You have heard Adrien. He is, of course, first focused, quality price issues, but then also the protection gap issues that are becoming more and more prominent. I don't know whether you heard this morning the speech of Susan Neely. Global protection gaps are increasing. So from your perspective, when you look at it, consumers, what they are faced with, what are you expecting?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. First, a disclaimer. So I'm a consumer representative. I'm speaking on behalf of consumer interests here. So I might give you some provocative thoughts and reflections, but please, I come in peace. Huh?
but this is why we have invited you.
Yes, so first of all, I would like, in terms of protection gap and gap, I would like to come back to the previous panel that I found really very inspiring, very interesting. But I think we have a different perspective because what we feel from consumers for the moment, overall in the financial industry, but also specifically in the insurance industry, is a combination of frustration and resignation because of lack of human interaction. And I think that that's something, of course, there are people who like automation and robo-advice and all that stuff, but there are still people who appreciate having somebody at the end of a help desk, of a phone line. And we are convinced, but I mean, it's your business model, you need to make it work, that those companies and those industries that keep the human interaction will be the ones that will survive the digital hype, just to say. And you spoke about the trust element at the previous panel, and about the fact that there is a lot of transparency. But I can tell you, from the consumer perspective, there has never been as much asymmetry of information as now with digitalization. You know so much more about me than I know about you and about your products. And then when it comes to ChatGPT or any other type of generative AI, can you imagine that I, as a consumer, not educated, let's say, can say, what is the best car insurance for me, ChatGPT? And they will just make it up. So it's really a danger for the industry because they are going to ruin all dashboards, all comparison tools, all serious stuff. So I really think, don't procrastinate and act on AI, on generative AI, because we have submitted a complaint to the safety authorities because it's a safety issue for consumers, but also to the consumer protection authorities because we really believe that this is going to disrupt the market in an unfair way. Not only in insurance, but insurance is part of the victims of that. Now, speaking about digitalization, because I heard it, and I hear it very often. Thanks to digitalization, thanks to open data, you will be able to provide us with better service. I can tell you, and you already mentioned it in the previous panel, that's not our perception at all. And there is, and Petra, you mentioned it, if you don't guarantee or put the safeguards in place for inclusiveness, the whole concept of insurance, which is about pooling risks so that the low risk will compensate for the high risk, will be destroyed. And at the end, you will only get insurance if you don't really need it because you are a good profile. And this type of personalization, of your profile is something that I have already mentioned to several of you. And I have never had an answer telling me, don't worry. So I continue worrying. So this is my job. Sorry for that. So this being said, let's now go to your question. Well, I already mentioned the so discrimination to some extent is part of the insurance risk assessment, but there are elements that is totally, let's say, legitimate, but the balance needs to be struck. And so, but the cursor should not be put in a way that it's unfair for people who are just, in a poor situation for many, many reasons, and not necessarily because of their mistakes or negligence, to be excluded from insurance. On the pension gap, we have discussed this a lot, Michaela, and really you convinced me. And there are a lot, and it's true, that it's a major bomb that is going to explode sooner rather than later. And first of all, there are consumers who just cannot afford to save. They just, and we are in the cost of living crisis, this is a problem. Then there are consumers who could do that, who could save for their pensions and who don't do it. Well, the first element, they are aware, but they procrastinate. And can I tell you, I have 3 kids between 35 and 40. I think they're educated, and they have a mother telling them every second lunch when we get together, did you think about your pension? They are, of course, in the middle of their kids and of their home renovation and of what have you. And then I get that type of look like, get lost, mom. But this is those are normal people, and still getting made aware. But then also, there are all those risk-averse consumers that don't really dare going into investment products because they perceive them as dangerous or, let's say, risky, not necessarily dangerous. Then they go to insurance products, and now I don't know whether I will ever have lunch again with Michaela because she won't like that. Insurance products have a lower return for pensions than investment products. There are products offered on the market, like the ETFs, that have a better return than insurance for consumers on the long term. But people are not aware, and so they stick with safe products but low return instead of going into the investment market in the less risky market there. So this is something that we think needs to be addressed. On the climate gap, this is a very important element there, and there also we need to make people aware. Most of consumers believe that either their house insurance or their fire insurance or their car insurance could protect them, or in case of floods or whatever climate disaster. And then the people think that the authorities will take care of them. Public authorities will take care, but at a given moment, if there is a multiplication of disasters, the authorities' budget will be 0. So we really need to make people aware that there is a problem there, but we also need an offer. An offer where there are not too many exemptions, not too many exclusions, and that are affordable. And there the problem with climate gap is that the most exposed consumers for climate disasters are the less affluent ones. So how can you include them in an insurance offer that they can manage? So we know it's not easy, but this is something that really, I think, would deserve a conversation there. And then I would like to say something else to mitigate the climate risk, because we really believe that, and this is as a consumer organization, not as consumer representatives, we really believe that insurers are part of the solution when it comes to mitigate climate risk, meaning stop supporting those industries that are part of the problem. Try to incentivize those companies that genuinely want to be more sustainable. Penalize those companies that are going on polluting without any, let's say, second thoughts. Also, you are large-scale investors. Invest into those companies or into those businesses or into those technologies that are a part of the solution. And then third, you are a major stakeholder with authorities, with policymakers. So join consumer organizations in asking for very strict regulation when it comes to real economy regulation, the Green Deal, for example, phasing out of combustion engines, support to renewables, energy efficiency of homes, gas boilers, hydrogen, and there is all this thing, which in fact there is an industry trying to, stop. Now the hype word in Brussels is the pause button, started by Mr. Macron. And this is really something that we cannot afford. The planet cannot afford it, consumers cannot afford it, and the insurance industry cannot afford it. We really need to act quickly. And if you can join the call for stricter regulation, at least in the design, I can understand what you mentioned. You weighed a little bit on the the other types of regulation where there is no emergency, but here we have an emergency situation. We cannot procrastinate on climate legislation.
Thank you. A long list, Monique, but as I said, this is exactly why we wanted you here. Petra, turning over to you, your perspective, yes. And maybe you want to react on some of the issues that Monique has raised.
I'll try to do that along the way. We agreed I would share also some data. I like sometimes to just have some numbers. So I'm going to use paper because I didn't memorize them all. I'm sorry. But so talking about gaps, and first of all, by the way, thank you for inviting me. I'm really very happy to be in Paris, but also to be at Insurance Europe. Now in my second year, I know many more faces. I always appreciate your feedback because that's how we get to better regulation, including from you, Monique, by the way, yeah, for sure. So some numbers. Huh? So let's look at, and we touched on the pension gap. The rough number is 1 in 5 Europeans at serious risk of not having or living in poverty. And this is EU citizens living in poverty, 20%. That's a problem. If you now look at how do consumers perceive that themselves, we did this Eurobarometer. 9% of the ones that responded is very confident they will live fine at retirement age, and 36% is somewhat confident. The rest, that's 52, is not confident of totally already desperate. So I think that means that 50% plus actually realizes that they have a problem. So the perception, at least, of having an issue is more. But then again, between poverty and being able to go on vacation 3 times a year, I mean, it's also the expectation of your retirement. But I think there is a problem there. Now, from a gender perspective, that's even worse. And so across the board, we see 35% more risk for women to live in poverty, and in general, they get 30% less pension. This is why I'm actually very happy with the Equal Pay Directive, because more or less a difference in pay today is 3 times the difference in pensions in the end. Mm-hmm. And as a society, we still have not solved how we deal with the fact that someone has to produce babies, and that takes some time. And I think we need to work on that. I would have loved to just lay eggs and drop them off at the reception of my work. I couldn't. So but we need to work on that. That should not result in a major pension gap. And taking care not only of women these days, but on an aging continent, we are taking care of parents. So I think that's a societal question, but it's also a question that, again, yes, we are helping through insurance, but we're not helping everyone. Now, what other role is there then to save for later? And this goes back to this need for people to start saving. And some can't. It's the cost of living crisis. Some know they should, but they don't. Some don't even really realize. And so if we ask them themselves, 31% of people, when we asked them and said, are you not buying because you don't feel you're getting the right products? 31 said they really feel that they have been misled in the past in buying something they didn't really need. And 45 is thinking that they don't get the right advice, or they're not getting unbiased advice. Now again, it is a perception of a consumer. I'm not saying that is actually happening. If we look at it from a supervisory perspective, I think that the number of problems in the market is a lot less, but this is the perceptive. So how do you bring that together? It's building on trust, it's communication. We discussed that in the previous panel, but also very concretely, already in my first half year, EIOPA produced advice on a pension tracking system for each individual EU citizen, and we produced advice on a dashboard. That one is still not really going anywhere. It's sitting with the Commission. I think they were very happy. They organized some roundtables. It's not flying. You see a lot of national debates on pensions. I would always watch those, because whatever the debate is, once there is a conclusion, it will impact pension and insurance market for sure. But I think in general, and if I can add to the list of what I reported to Geek on what I need from the next Commission, is I would like to see a development of a EU, a national and a personal dashboard on where you are in your pension savings with Pillar 1, 2 and 3. It's about first raising awareness and then helping with products. And we really need that. And I'm told, Petra, you can't touch Pillar 1. Pillar 1 social and labor law doesn't know pillar 2 and 3. We somehow need to overcome that and get to an overview, and that will help us all. Because once we start saving more for later, we also create more investment opportunity for the green transition. So, I mean, we can help each other here. Finally, maybe on natural catastrophe and the gaps. We see there clearly gaps for sure. If you look into that, some member states we are. So in the Netherlands, there were it was 6% that said I have no insurance whatsoever for net cat events. But if you look at Greek or Italian consumers, it's more than a third of the society that says they're not insured. Now, does that mean they think there won't be a solution? Yes, they think the government will step in. And so many companies, or many consumers rely actually on the government stepping in. Now that in itself, again, is an incentive to not get insurance. And here, I won't talk long, but we just published a paper together with the ECB on policy options on how to deal with net cat risks that very much starts with mitigation, adaptation, then getting insurance, then looking at how we can enlarge the capacity in the insurance market in the broader financial sector, but finally public-private partnership, dealing with moral hazard on the one hand, but also making sure that as a society can handle these risks. So here I think it's dialogue, it's making use of the ability of insurers to assess risks. And I think that voice, the risk assessment part, needs to be much louder going forward for adaptation, mitigation, recognizing the role to insure. But as you said, Monique, you said we need, with little exclusions and not too much exceptions, we need a cheap product. That's a challenge. And so I think this requires a broader dialogue. But a dialogue that we need to have because it is urgent. I think the policy options that we produce with ECB shows that there is definitely a role for insurance, but insurance on its own can't solve it all. And so that's where the dialogue comes in. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I think you couldn't have said it more perfectly. It happens to be also the conclusion in the GFIA protection gap study that you need to do this together. There is so much we can do, but we can't do it all on our own. I'm happy to have David with us. David, thanks for making it. I don't know to what extent you have been able to follow the entire debate, but can you give us now your perspective? You know, you look at it obviously as the CEO of a company that operates in many markets. What do you see in terms of challenges for consumers and for you as an industry that wants to serve consumers?
Yes, good morning everybody. Can you hear me well, Michaela?
Very well, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, apologies for being here. Or there actually. And Monique, I also come in peace, by the way. Sorry, I got stuck in an airport and I couldn't make it, so apologies for that. Yeah, I think indeed as we operate in 11 European countries and in Japan, I think it's very clear that in all these markets we see, to different extents, we see a very clear protection gap. And I think, we've also seen that actually this gap is increasing. I think governments and employers are less willing to pick up some of this protection gap. So risks are being shifted to individuals, and then we get increasing other risks like indeed the weather, pandemic, and others. So I think the real question for us is, so how do we address this? And I think there has been a lot of focus on product selection. I actually think the biggest focus should be on how do we close this advice gap. If you see today what happens in the markets where we operate, so we would have an agent or a broker or a bank talks to a customer, and typically the situation with the customer is complex. They might have not worked for a while, there might be some personal money, there may be a family thing or not, they may have been self-employed, maybe divorced. So what we experience is that the whole needs-based analysis on the customer side is very complex. And then ultimately you get to a protection gap, maybe they need term insurance or disability or something else. These products, in my view, are not that complex anymore. But actually getting to what gap do you have, what action do you need to take, is actually the most difficult. including in the Netherlands and in the UK. I've also visited Sweden for this matter. So if you take a very big step forward, if somebody say now you need to pay €100 for advice, in our experience, most customers typically not willing to do it. The high end will, the middle and the lower class will not. They will either go to execution only, or they will not even think about it, because most people, probably contrary to us, don't really enjoy thinking about these kind of topics. And that often then leads to an actually increased advice gap. And I think the Dutch market is often referred to, but let's be aware that the third pillar, the savings and protection pillar in the Netherlands, practically doesn't exist anymore. I think 5% of customers still in the Netherlands are active in this third pillar. So for us, it's not even a real market anymore. So I think, I think what is wise is to think about how can we transition customers, that they become aware that financial advice is important, but that also they need to pay for it, one way or the other, but we need to do this step by step. And I think Freedom actually did a good model there, where they took time actually to migrate customers to taking their own responsibility. And then I think finally, on some of the comments that were made, I do think there is a real step forward that we need to take in terms of transparency. We need to avoid it becomes a bureaucratic monster, because before you know it, we've created another, I don't know, a cookie or other regulation where people just annoyingly will click OK, but no one reads it. And we've created transparency, but it has no impact. Monique, I think on AI and human interaction, I'm not so sure. What I see now is that more and more with ChatGPT, there's been some really good pilots where even people end up preferring ChatGPT type of AI over a real doctor. So I'm not so sure, and we're clearly at the beginning of this, whether human interaction will always be needed. I do agree that in the current stage where it is, most of the chatbots are just typically annoying because they're not good enough yet. But I do think getting more AI in there and making sure that it becomes cheap and available also for lower and middle class incomes, I think is one of the solutions that I see. Fully share the inclusive comment. I also worry about this. The more we become good at data analytics, the more you can get concerns around inclusivity. So that is still an open topic. And then finally, on climate change on the topic, I think there's a huge role for our industry in underwriting and probably also on the investment side. But the more we can compete from the European front with the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act from the US, I think that will be needed. I see a lot of companies moving production to the US on green transition, while this is one of the few countries where we were leading in Europe. If we're not careful, we'll also lose out there to the Americans. So let me stop here.
Okay, thank you very much, David. So I think we had a very interesting first round of discussion, and I would be tempted now, because we have to let you in on a secret, had a very quick exchange when we were mic'd up, and we talked about, do we need advice? And can we offer advice as an industry? So Monique, I would like to put you on the spot, because you made a very blunt statement in the backside. So
I can do it again.
Exactly. Go ahead.
I mean, first of all, and it's also a little bit a response to what David just mentioned. The problem with transparency and over-information is that the complexer the product, the more complicated the information that you need to give to the consumer. So try just to be simple. Sometimes simple can be also a good product. Now, coming back to the question, yes, of course, people need advice. Not in all cases, but in some of the more complicated, let's say, insurance decisions that they have to take, yes, and they appreciate advice. What we see currently in the market, that many of the advice available is biased by inducements. And that's where we have a problem, because we believe that you cannot, we hear, I mean, let's be very clear, I mean, we have been discussing this for years. What we hear as an alert by the industry saying, if you ban inducements, there will be an advice gap. And we say, better no advice than bad advice. So I'm very straightforward, still in peace, but straightforward. And I mean, of course, advice will not solve the whole issue of complexity of insurance or of bad decisions. I'm not saying that, but we believe that there must be a very clear distinction between products that are being just pitched. I mean, like when you buy a car and you go to the seller, it's not a transportation advisor, huh? Okay? So when you buy an insurance product, it's a seller of an insurance, it's not an advisor. An advisor is somebody who is with you and who guides you and who supports you in your decision making. This is not very often the case when you have, let's say, an inducement-based advice system.
But would you have less of a problem if the terminology would change?
What would you suggest?
A salesperson?
Well, the point is...
Top of my head, huh?
Well, the top of your... I think that what we believe is that there needs to make, space needs to be made in the market for independent advice to be available. Yeah. And to be affordable for consumers. So and this can take different ways, but certainly the first step would be to say, don't call advice what is not advice. That's a misqualification.
Okay, so we have a terminology issue
to start with.
Okay. You also talked about, you know, the need for human interaction, but that implies advice in a way.
But we are not against advice.
Yeah.
We are against the fact that that the product is being sold with, let's say, in the back of the mind of the person who sells it, that there is an incentive. And can I just say, I'm speaking on behalf of consumers, and I only have the legitimacy to speak on behalf of consumer interests. I have very frequent contacts with the employees of the services sector who tell me that they are also against inducement because they are very much under stress because they have, like, you know, those sales targets. So there is a problem there with the fact that this inducement creates a bias in the decision-making process.
Okay, let me talk to David and Adrien, but maybe Adrien, we start with you and then move over to David.
Yeah, maybe a word on that, because I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all solution on the inducement stuff. People need advice as regards insurance, because we have to keep in mind what are the situations we have to cover. It's not always very simple situations. It's assessing situation of families that evolve, that grows, divorce, preparing what's after I'm not there. If I die, what happens to my family? And for this, you need an advice. You need to apprehend an overall situation. What I do believe, and I have the chance to have a group in which we have different types of channels of distribution, some with inducements, some with no inducements. And my belief is that it depends on the situation you treat. The more complex the situation is, and in life we have complex situations, the more advice and sophisticated advice we need. And it requires expertises that cannot be digitalized. On the other side, for maybe more mass market approaches, maybe more simple commercial approaches corresponding to simple products may fit. But I don't think that a one-size-fits-all regulation can solve the thing. I see two important levels. The first is competition. Competition is good for the consumer. So everything that fosters competition is a good thing. We had 7 years ago on the French market the infra-annual resiliation that every insurer was against it. But 7 years later, you see it was a good thing because it changed the way we approach the relationship with our policyholders. Transparency fosters competition as well. But on the other side, if there are bad players regarding inducements, regarding all commercial practices, there should be more sanctions. And I prefer that bad players are sanctioned rather than having overall regulation that sometimes fit very bad to the specificities of products we have to propose to our policyholder or the specificities of channels of distribution.
Thanks, Adrien. David, you were saying earlier, one of the mistakes we have maybe made as an industry was that we didn't say that advice actually has a cost. And that is something that, you know, is maybe coming to the fore now more in the public debate. Maybe you want to weigh in. And just a quick notice to the team, can you bring me the iPad for the public questions? I left it at my seat, sorry for that. So David, over to you.
Yeah. No, indeed, I think as also financial advice, I think, you know, in some form or shape, certainly if you want human interaction, you know, has a cost. I think if you look at the way advice goes, even when I talk about, for example, the NN-type agents, you know, if you look at how that process goes, I mean, so there is, first of all, you get all needs-based analysis, there's sales quality policies, there's value for money policies. It's scrutinized by our internal compliance, even the regulator, in our case the ANM or another regulator, goes through the process of needs-based analysis to look at whether there's any misalignment. So I think first of all, let's not pretend that these advice, you know, is just a free-for-all where companies or agents can do whatever they want. There is already an enormous amount of regulation on how to do that. I think that's one. I think two, again, I think what is often more important, there seems to be a lot of focus on, I get all the way to the end of my advice, and do I then advise a term insurance of NN or a term insurance of, I don't know, Allianz? And that seems to be like the core of the discussion. Well, I actually think the core of the discussion is, how do you get to the situation where you know what gaps there are to fill? And that is, for me, a much more important step than ultimately which end product is what, because I think most of these products are quite simple. And by the way, this is not any different with banks. If you go into a bank, you will get, for a mortgage, you will also go through a whole process of what mortgage fixture, what duration, you know, what down payments, etc. And then you always end up at the end of the process with a mortgage of that specific bank. So I don't think that is by default an issue as long as we have a proper process. And I think, I can't speak for all industry, but I think from what I've seen in large companies is that by now these advice things that the process that the customers go through, I think are well structured. I think on the comment on employees being under pressure, I don't know. I mean, it's all this hearsay type of things. We do a lot of surveys under our own colleagues. The thing that they are bothered most with is the amount of documents that they need to write and share with customers. And that's the amount of paperwork already. I mean, they need to give a brochure. They need to give a insurance product information document that, you know, this IPIT, which is a whole document the customer needs to sign. They need to give a price offer. They need to share the policy and terms. For unit-linked and investment products, they have a cliff kit that they need to share and talk through, annual value statements. So the amount of documents that already are being handed to the customer, I think, is actually a bigger challenge to make that workable than what I see in the experience of our own colleagues. So I think there's clearly room for improvement, but I think let's really avoid that we don't create some extra regulation trying to solve a problem but then creating a bigger advice.
Thank you, David. I know Monique is burning to come in. You wanted to have a quick reaction, yeah?
Yeah, just one thing about the free. We have educated consumers to have advice at no cost. And this is really a very important remark because across consumer markets, when something is for free, it means that somebody else has to pay. So it's cross-subsidization. And so you have, you know, many of the social media services are for free, but you're killing the press. You know, you're killing, you know, those who consumer organizations have strong competition in free social media, and so that means it's very important to be aware of that. And for consumers, when something is for free, means that they are the lunch. Huh? So don't forget about that.
Yes.
I completely agree. And I think actually the social media companies are a very good example. They pretended that Twitter and Facebook and all that for free. Obviously, it's not. The moment they tried to charge $1, for example, for WhatsApp account, it was a huge outbreak. Now, WhatsApp and Instagram give people a lot more pleasure than financial advice for firms. But even there, the willingness of so many customers to have to pay for something that they always thought was free, you know, created so much controversy that the big tech actually retracted most of the So I think the whole point is that we need to educate them step by step. And if we just because I think that way we avoid that we lose a lot of customers along the way.
Thanks, David. I think perfect lead over to Petra. The role of regulation in all this. We have now a new retail investment strategy that, you know, has a number of, at least from an industry perspective, positive elements, but also a number of elements where we probably would struggle with. Let me just quote 2-3 points. We were hoping to have less information, clearer information, because we are frequently, and by the way, very frequently by you told, you just need to explain your products in a simpler manner, maybe also create simpler products. But when we talk to the industry, we hear that often 80–85% of the process is now to tick the box on regulation and less on really working on explaining the product per se. It's more compliance-related work. The length of time that we spend with clients for the advice is also enlarged because we have all these requirements. There are commendable efforts, I think, that the Commission has taken to bring down these information requirements, currently 339. But then apparently in other areas of the risk, elements are reintroduced that would lead to an increase yet again. So we take it away on one side, maybe introduce it on the other. So one big block. The advice question is obviously also one. Would be interested in your thought on that. So maybe if you can give us a quick assessment from your end.
Yes, happy to do so. And naturally, we also assessed the proposal from the Commission. It's the Commission's proposal. We gave input, and that's my advice, the EIOPA advice that we delivered. It's not I think in a way, it's not a very complicated discussion, even though we can really make it difficult. But back to the Eurobarometer. If you ask in the Eurobarometer, if you ask Europeans, do you think you get unbiased advice? 64% says no, I don't. So now, interestingly enough, if you go to the one market that has a ban on inducements, if you ask them, do you think you get unbiased? 50% says no. So there is something in society also about advice and unbiased advice. If you then go more to what we see as supervisors, and supervisors are gearing up on POC supervision, product and oversight governance supervision, and in the context of conduct, that's a logic development. I think Solvency II, I think we're all getting used to it, so we have also some time and energy to look at conduct. I just said in my previous remarks that we've had that developing also more home host, it becomes more relevant. But I think we still, as supervisors, are building our knowledge and practice there. So product and oversight governance, I think, is something that will further develop over time. Developing over time, David said it, I think is very important in this context. Now, if you look at where we were at the beginning of this year with the whole retail investment strategy discussion, and more or less was one camp was in the no ban because it will kill our market, and by the way, there's not really a problem. And then there was the other side that says there's a huge problem, and the only way to solve it is with a ban. Now, that's a black and white discussion. That's never helpful. On the one hand, with a ban, for sure, you're going to take away some of the concerns. You're not going to take away all, and you're going to create some new problems. If you are if you're saying there's not a problem and we don't need a ban, you're also not being fair. There are outliers. We have very concrete examples of products being sold to the wrong customer, to the wrong target markets, products being sold at way too high costs, sometimes for sure also through bank assurance, profits not ending up with the insurer but with the bank. But still, this is not helping consumers, it's not helping trust in insurance, and it's definitely not helping the feeling about advice. So that we need to solve. Now, I think with the proposal of the Commission at a time that we want more retail investment, try to deal with this issue, I think is very good. So I welcome that proposal. At the same time, I think we need to look at it very carefully and see this ambition, this needs to deal with these issues in a context where advice is needed, because I think advice is very much needed in these days. How can we work on that? Now, if you compare the current Commission proposal with what EIOPA advised, you will see that we did not propose to have a best interest test. However, I think what it tries to do is very helpful. But here maybe I go back to what David was saying. If you look at it from a value for money perspective, you actually look at the entire process of how you manufacture, distribute, and then sell the product. You do not only focus on this point of sale. And then if you do that very properly, maybe you already have dealt with the problem without asking particularly tight ends to do a whole additional interest test. It's the same with how many products do you need to present to a consumer. I think the concern is that again, the target market is not being served in a proper way. And trust me, the example I always give, I see several ones, but the one that so far has been the worst is where clearly the target market lapses after 7 years, and it's being sold products that only generate return after 20. This is happening in Europe. And yes, if you think, yeah, that's other markets, no, it's also happening in your market probably. So we need to deal with that. So I think, and so what I would really encourage in this discussion is if we want a transition, and EIOPA normally advocates for an evolution, not a revolution, we need to first of all be able to recognize that there are some issues, for sure in a world that will become more digital, for sure in a world where insurers that are not licensed in your member state, in your market, are selling to your consumers, that you need to be able to understand the product, to compare the product, and there has to be a supervisor that looks at the value for money, which again is a process that does not only happen at the point of sale, but has many steps before. That's product and oversight governance. Finally, it's not only about costs. It is not only about costs. It's about a benefit for the consumer. And that benefit may well be that they actually get to go whenever they want to an actual office, meet a real person that then talks to them live and gives them advice. But that comes at a cost. But if you can explain it and show that, then that is a benefit for the consumer that is reflected in the price, which could perfectly well still work. So I think costs are relevant. Benchmarks might help as long as they are guidance, not caps. I do not believe in caps. And costs only is not the way to look at it. It has to also include the benefits, the service provided, and maybe the actual cost the insurer made. So, and I think that all is in the concept of value for money that EIOPA has. I'm very happy to see a lot of that reflected in the RIS. I also think it's good that we further discuss what is needed, because I think in the end what we try to address is a problem. It's not huge yet, but we don't want it to get huge, because if it gets huge, then Pillar 3 products will no longer happen, and the ban could be an only way forward. So let's use this opportunity. Insurers stepping up on POC supervision, industry stepping up on creating this transparency, explaining that it actually comes at a cost, and providing good advice. And I think we also have an opportunity here to do that, because that is also in this proposal from the Commission.
And how optimistic are you about the role of regulation that can really get us away from this overload that we have? I mean, we have discussed earlier, you know, transparency. When you look at just the current situation, what we give consumers in terms of costs, we give 30 different cost points currently about, you know, aggregate cost, percentage cost, exit costs, entrance costs, ongoing costs. There is an avalanche that I think, Monique, to your point, customers are overwhelmed with. So what is the possibility now in the retail investment strategy to step back, also time-wise, to step back, have a reflection on what can really help, and streamline the whole process to the benefit, ultimately, to get people look at the wood and, you know, the tree rather than the entire wood, and to identify what is really relevant for them, because we believe there is a lot currently that makes it very hard for the consumer to do exactly that. We will take 5 more minutes. I know this is a panel where we could probably have another hour. I would love to ask you about benchmarks, and we are running out of time.
But maybe if I can say, I think it is the consumer-centric approach.
Yeah.
So literally, think about your 40-year-old kid who finally goes get that pension product. Does that kid want to know 30 different ways of cost, or does it want to know how much are you making when you sell me A, B, or C? I mean, do you have an interest? Just how much commission, or do you get that? Because it gives a feel. Do you want to know, like, if I put in so much, how much actually is going, how much am I paying you, and how much am I saving? I think we need to think about that consumer-centric. We will be helped by digital tools. Even if you get it on paper, dashboards help. And so I think there's a lot of tooling that can make information presented simple, but consumer-centric is essential. And finally, I mean, if you are talking to a very advanced client who really wants super advice on 1,000 options, okay. But seriously, multi-option products that have like hundreds of possibilities, is that the standard, or is that for the niche? And so simple products that provide simple solutions, I think for a large part of our market will be great. And those you must be able to explain those. So consumer-centric, moving indeed away from transparency being sharing all we have, that clearly doesn't work. So moving back on that, using digital, and being open on this is what we make, and this is what you get, and actually that's value for money because. And I think that is what needs to happen.
Thanks. I take that as your closing comment, if I may. Monique.
Well, I think it's a very inspiring closing comment, because I think that overload of information can be handled by smart ways of presenting information, because you can do a decision tree. There are, what type of consumer are you? What do you want as information? And if you can manage that, you can do it in a I mean, we have digital tools, use them in the benefit of the consumer.
If we are allowed.
Well, then let's be smart about it. We wouldn't oppose that, because we all go digital, and we are not against digital tools as long as the safeguards are being established and enforced. So no, I think there is really I always say being a consumer should not be a full-time job, because you have, of course, the insurance market. You have, how many of you have read all the terms and conditions on your smartphone? Raise your hand. Voila. So, and you should, because there are a lot of things, and that's the same with insurance contracts at the end of the day. So, but if they would be put and I'm a lawyer, I can read complicated text, but it's done on purpose so that you don't read it. So, but if you can do it in a very consumer-friendly way. Just take the people who know about that in your teams, and it would be already a big progress.
Thanks a lot, Monique. Adrien, and then David, you have the last word. Adrien.
I think the debate has gotten more and more mature, and if you see how much the sector has changed for years, it makes me very optimistic to this point. I think that today no one on the sector contradicts the value for money approach. The type of debate that we now want to have is what's the money for value approach, because we all agree that the advice is very important and it's an investment. So we have to get further into the debate of what's the value for money, okay, but what the money for value, what's the level of service we want to have, which is not just equivalent to a level of cost. And in this balance, adapted to very different domestic situations in the 27 countries of Europe, I think we can very positively, in the dialogue, move forward.
Thanks a lot, Adrien. David?
Yeah, no, totally, I agree with Adrien. I think there's been some real progress, but that doesn't mean that there's no room for improvement, and no doubt there is. I think, just commenting on the last discussion from Monique and Petra, I think we all agree, but the reality is that so far, simplify it, but it's not because of the product anymore, but because of all the regulation around it. So I think, I would certainly applaud also that we find ways to make it simpler, more transparent communication to customers that also comply with all the regulation that is there. But so far, I'm afraid the trend has been a bit the opposite, that information and complexity towards customers actually increased instead of reduced. Now, I'm sure it's not only regulation, we probably have a role to play as well. I can assure you it's not by design. We try to make it very complex. To be honest, I don't see a reason why we would. And I think that's also for the retail investment strategy point, I think that is still a concern. How can we make this workable, that it's also actually in the interest of customers and understandable, and not the next document on the list that I was just saying of things that we will be handing out to customers that I'm afraid they will not read. And probably we all align on that. But the how, we still have some work to do if I look at what the current regulations say.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. I apologize to the audience that I didn't have the time to go to your questions, but I really wanted to let the conversation flow as it was. You will probably agree with me that we are really at the start of these discussions. There is so much more we could discuss, so many more detailed aspects we go in. I'm very happy that Didier had also a chance to listen, and I would very much hope we can continue also this engagement. Monique, it's important to us to have this conversation, frank and open. Obviously, Petra, you know we are doing this on an ongoing basis, and I would invite everyone to join in this discussion to hopefully get to an outcome that is manageable and brings the right results to customers. And with this, I think I hand back to Karel, who will give you some instructions for lunch. Thank you very much.